I have the honour of moderating this panel. I should warn you, this panel has not been rehearsed in any way. Okay, so we're just meeting each other for the first time, like strangers on a flight or on a bus. And so what we tell each other is going to be new to all of us. I'm not going to ask people to make individual speeches because I find that makes for less interesting panels. I do want us to have this as a conversation as much as we can with the limited number of microphones that we have. I want to involve you later on, so I will think as we go through this, think about questions you might want to ask the panelists. If they say something particularly spectacular that you want to comment on, remember that and write it down and preferably put it on X or whatever that's called these days. But above all, I have one sacred mission today, which is to make sure we finish on time for lunch. So having said I want this as a conversation, I thought it would be useful, first of all, if people could give them a brief introduction to themselves. I do mean brief, people, especially for the academics amongst us, brief. Okay. Who you are and why the SDGs are really important to you. And I'm going to start here on my left, actually.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rittika, Parruck, and I am the Director Education for the British Council, as was mentioned. And I think in my role, I look at collaboration between UK and India in all of education. And I realized that SDG goal may be the only way that we can save our future as a planet. At least the human beings, the planet will remain in whatever shape or form. Hence, I think it's extremely important to address this question at every forum, literally. Thank you.
So, thank you for making it a conversation, and thank you everyone for being here. My name is Atul Khosla. I am the founder and Vice Chancellor of Shoolini University. We are located in Himachal Pradesh, up in the mountains where we have to protect the environment. That's important. We're seeing lots of floods out there, and we all know it's because of global warming. But anyway, I do believe, and we do believe at Shoolini, that a university is a microcosm of new thoughts. We as citizens of the world need to protect the environment. We need to implement SDGs across different areas. And as a university, we can do three things. One is, like I said, as a microcosm, go out and implement new ideas. We are a small city. Each campus is a small city. So experiment new thoughts, be carbon neutral. But secondly, be on the forefront of thoughts, research around SDGs. And finally, go out and promote SDGs across the community. So that's what we do. We take it very seriously. We also participate in your impact survey. We're number 2 in the country in the Times impact rankings. And that's why I'm here today. So thank you so much for calling me.
Thanks, Duncan, and hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Gaurav. I work with Penguin Random House. We are a global trade publisher. That means we publish books across kids, adult fiction, non-fiction. The idea of the SDGs is very close to our hearts because the fact that we publish print primarily indicates that we use a lot of paper, right? And that impacts the environment as it is. For us as a company globally, sustainability has come to the forefront now, and we've got very clear goals for 2030, which I won't get into right now. But I do think conversations like this, particularly with the young students in the room, is very important because the ideas that we discuss are primarily you guys are going to take forward as you enter the world of corporate or education. So thank you again for coming. It's wonderful to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
My interest in SDG goes actually a very long time ago when there were MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, in 2000. At that time, I was working for the United Nations University in Tokyo. And we published several reports on the implementation of the MDGs and the change from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals back in 2014 and 2015. I also published a book called Fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals 2 years ago. It was a co-authored book looking at how COVID-19 affected the implementation of the goals quite significantly, unfortunately, we must say. So some of the delay which was mentioned this morning very much is due also to COVID-19, to the paralysis of many industries and economies. However, we were still positive that the human factor will play a role in all of that. So I also published a book on implementation on the Paris Agreement of climate change, 2018, looking at how the mechanism of the Paris Agreement can be enforceable for more member states. Again, not very much good news there. We still see the latest IPCC report, assessment reports, alarming us that the progress is not sufficient, and I will talk later exactly how university can help on that.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Tarun. I'm CEO for Mercer Mettl. Mercer Mettl is an online assessment company, a very strong tech platform, a lot of content capabilities to conduct assessments, a lot of corporates, education institutes. We've been at forefront of taking assessments completely online, thus reduction of paper and other initiatives that ensure that there is far lesser consumption of paper and other ways of using technology to grow sustainably. I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for that. Just a reminder to panelists, microphone technique. This is good. This is acceptable. Less of this. Okay, we need to be heard. And it is a real privilege here to have a panel that has both people from inside academia, but also critically people from outside academia. One of the things that the goals focus on, in fact, specifically, there is a goal for this, SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals, talks about the importance and the necessity of collaboration. All too often in the world, we have barriers that are put up artificially, barriers between countries, barriers between different sectors of the economy. So it's particularly crucial that we have here people from outside academia to inform the discussion, which they should take as a cue for the fact that they're going to be asked to talk first, by the way, if they're paying attention. So I'm going to start actually with Chief Operations Officer. I'm not going to ask you to explain what a COO does. And are you a CEO? A very modest CEO. That's something they don't teach at the Harvard MBA. So a very modest CEO and a COO. So from your perspectives, what are the ways that universities and industry could collaborate effectively to deliver on the SDGs? And since only one of you has a microphone at the moment, we'll turn in this direction to start with.
So, thanks for the question. But if you look at both industry and academia, is it okay? Both have their own strengths, right? I mean, academia has this research bandwidth capability to come up with solutions to the real world problems that the industry is facing. I think those have to be leveraged. Some of these opportunities could be working on those joint projects where industry knows what the pain points are, and at any given point of time, industry will not have bandwidth or capability to work in all those areas. Hence, you lean on universities to do the first level research, come out with possible options how to deal with it, and then how do you take it to the market, the GTM, the execution part of it. I mean, then I think industry is suited better to do that. There are a couple of examples for Volkswagen has started with Stanford, set up a institute of excellence where they're looking at next gen mobility, how to make it sustainable. Unilever has started with say Cambridge, and they're trying to figure out what molecules can help us grow food or next set of product innovation which is sustainable. So there are examples. One key area obviously is research, where both of them can come together, pull in the resources, strengths, and deliver something. Second could be, again, it could be certain projects which could come out of industry, can be incubated inside a institution. But again, there the focus should also be apart from, say, how financially viable that project is, how easy it is to take it to the market, viability, in terms of the SDGs. I mean, what kind of impact are we creating? And those parameters, metrics should be very measurable.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the microphone along this time. I'm going to pass my microphone along, which is a risky thing for me to do.
Well, it's a really broad question, right? Because collaboration can run across all the various SDGs. So what I'm going to try and do is just focus on the education part of it. Our philosophy is that books educate hearts and minds. That's the core of where we start from. From a perspective of working together with universities, again, I think it comes down to kids for us, the students there. I think there are a number of projects that the students can do with a publishing house like ours, e.g. coming in, looking at the kind of paper we use, being creative around how we could use environment-friendly paper. Just to give you guys a little example. I think from a corporate side to universities, one of the lesser things that seem to happen is actually corporates coming into universities and engaging with students and ideating in terms of what, even though the students might not be involved, for example, in the publishing industry, I do think the creativity exists. So our approach, or my approach rather, would be if we are given the opportunity to come and engage at the university level. So for example, what I'm doing is I'm probably going to become a visiting lecturer at a university not too far from OP actually. And the idea again there is to go out there, and engage with students and really come up with call to action ideas. I don't know what they are right now, so I'm not going to sit here and give you a list of 10. But I do think the idea of information exchange, as you pointed out earlier as well, is important. There are multiple ways apart from this as well, but I do think it's a first step, and the first step should be engagement, where the barriers of corporate and education are broken down from just a career counseling conversation to actually utilizing the minds of students to really impact and act as consultants to us, because we don't have the answers. For us, it's that bottom line that we invariably think about. But I think to be critiques for industry is really important. So that would be a good start, I think.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And I think that really opens the door for our academics. So don't put the microphone down just yet. You don't get away with that on this panel, mate. You've got to work. So let's come to our academics and say, is that what you see? Is that what you think you can offer? Or is there more that we could do in these partnerships? And since you do have the microphone and didn't get rid of it in time.
Thank you, Duncan. I think, first of all, I'm going to make some hard statements, so I hope that's okay for all of you. I think the first, and this is very relevant to India, for whatever we might believe, the industry-academia relationships in India are broken. Honestly, we don't interact with each other. The times that academia remembers industry is when they want placements of students. And the time when industry remembers academia is when they need something out of academia, probably to give some peanuts of CSR, or they want talent. So it's broken today. So for industry, sustainability and SDGs, especially ESGs, are becoming very important. So I think the whole topic of SDGs can become a starting point for the dialogue, a deep dialogue between academia and industry. I think that could be a starting point for building a great partnership. So just as an example, Gaurav is now going, I think as a Shoka we are going, if you speak about, probably, okay. It's close to OP Jindal. That's fine. The offer is on for Shoolini if you desire to come up into the mountains. But I think that's a starting point of a great dialogue. Now, where do I see opportunities? And I'm going to talk about a little bit about what Shoolini is doing and how we're working with industry. So the first is, as we do research, and you were talking about research, So there is money sitting with industry to sponsor labs if you can have a viable project. As a small example, we do a lot of work on water and nanotech. The principal instrument you need is something called a scanning electron microscope. So we just got a funding from a company called Vardhaman Textiles for that, because that's the need they have from their perspective in terms of getting pollution-free water, and they've got money. So can, as industry, as academia, we come up with viable projects to industry, and there is money with industry and they want to collaborate. So I think that's one. I think the second area which I see, Duncan, is we have arms and legs in the form of students, and there's such beautiful students over here. So getting them engaged with the community around implementing SDGs, I think getting them aware. Again, as a small example, at Shoolini, it is compulsory for every student to actually go out and do a social project. So we work very closely on cancer with UVCAN. We have a muscular dystrophy center close by. We have adopted that. We work very closely with that. We work on a bunch of environmental initiatives. So I think getting students aware, working with industry on issues which are relevant, I think it's a win-win from both sides. And I think the final area is also about this whole topic about being carbon neutral. So no one has a perfect formula, but understanding the carbon footprint of the university and then using those models to go out into the industry and identifying their carbon footprint is another area we're working on. So I think these are 3 or 4 ideas I have, Duncan.
Thank you. Some constructive ideas, but a really challenging statement at the beginning there. The relationship is broken. I don't think, by the way, that's something that's necessarily unique to India. I think that's a more general problem.
I didn't want to, get into how it's globally, but I know it is broken.
But
I can do the global thing. If you want to, and by the way, SDG 9 is about industry, innovation, and technology. So we have a clear framing of this missing link, which my predecessor just talked about. And we are trying hard, as everybody knows, but there is still a long road to go. What I will try to define as the role of the universities in SDG is actually a macro agenda, which has been mentioned in terms of research, innovation, teaching, preparing future citizens, preparing future decision makers to take. And here we have a huge gaps between science and decision making. You know, the climate science already discovered climate change 200 years ago. The first physicists were talking about why the Earth is warming because of the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. And it took 170 years until 1992, when finally the leaders get together in Rio de Janeiro and adopted the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And even that has not been yet implemented. So in terms of scientific discovery, which universities do, to the point of this political decision making, it really takes a long, long time. And that gap needs to be addressed. But also the second challenge here is the speed of innovation and technology needed to cover the global challenges. The life is much faster today than what it used to be 100 or 200 years ago. So a big challenge for universities is how to be on the speed of the technological. And when I was a student like you, there was no internet, there were no mobile phones, and I think my grandchildren will live in a world which is much more fast and challenging and rapid. So that is also the role of universities, not to slow down, but to speed up the progress.
so we touched on briefly something there that I don't think came out as strongly as I expected, because one of the things I've noticed in discussion with governments, and actually it's been a general challenge from industry for many, many years, is around education and teaching. And the traditional complaint has been, and this is one of those things that where I'm sure there is an internet meme going back to find examples of times when industry has complained that the students of today are not coming into the workforce with the right skills. I suspect it goes back to at least ancient Rome, if not older than that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's an incorrect claim, but there was no mention there of green skills either. You know, are universities able to provide the students and the graduates with the green skills that's necessary for industry? And how do we do that without being bogged down in a very technological understanding of what a sustainable education means? Because you mentioned science and technology, but I'm concerned that we don't have enough focus on arts and humanities and being able to put science and technology into that broader perspective of what it means to be a sustainable citizen. And I would like to bring in the British Council at this point to say, what are you seeing in terms of that role as rounded educators for universities?
So one of the things that I'd like to share with you all is that we launched a Going Global call for industry academia links, and we received 92 applications for 4 grants that we could give out, which sends me scrambling looking for more money to support more. So even if it's broken, there's a great desire to mend those fences, I think, which is positive. I'd like to stay over here. In terms of green skills, we've seen it in 2 places. One of them is around state governments have been in touch with us because much of the green skilling at this moment that we've been engaged with is in service, where, for example, people who are looking at petroleum combustion engines want to transfer the skills onto managing and repairing electric vehicles. So because that is the shift we are going to see, and there needs to be more identified areas to work with. In terms of research, we're seeing green chemistry project with the ISA Pune, particularly leading in iRise, which is a multi-stakeholder. So it has DST, Tata Trust, ISA Pune, British Council, and Royal Society of Chemistry coming together. And consortiums like this, I think, are an answer because you need many roles. So you have the academia and you have the industry, but you need the catalysts as well, to get them together and get them going and take away some of the burden in that sense, of managing this complex situation. It's not easy for academia to respond immediately. I mean, if it's not happened, it's not for the want of desire, but the whole complexity of the situation of, running your day business of getting students through their qualifications, research that you do, and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the things that we are observing. Another thing that I wanted to mention is a lot around not just local collaborations between industry and academia, but global collaborations, because many industry are actually located in many countries. And the more you engage through industry academia, we hope that it will lead to more global collaborations, because unfortunately, none of the SDG goals respect any political boundary whatsoever. So if you want to get to solutions, you're going to have to seek more globally using local knowledge. So I think that's the thing that we are finding, Duncan, if it addresses your question.
Well, the point of this is to not just address the questions, but to go beyond that. I'm going to come back to our industrialists. Do we have the graduates with both the green skills and the awareness of sustainability that can support your business? And if not, what do we do about it? Because we need this to be positive as well. Who would like to come in first?
Yeah, please, Prof, go ahead. So, as a company, I think we're very well positioned in terms of the role that we have in terms of building that industry academia relationship, which I agree with Atul that it's kind of broken. We do a lot of campus assessments for a lot of companies, but to be honest, none of the companies look at green skills when they're hiring. What ma'am mentioned are, is these are, isolated center of excellence or certain key projects that we've driven, but at scale nothing is happening. There's a lot of noise discussions happening around it, but we don't see that as a requirement coming in from corporates. And while there will be some projects that are happening in these academic institute, but at scale I think we're not there yet. It's also because there's a problem of incentivization, right? I mean, most academic institutes, the end goal is getting X number of students placed in X number of organizations. But there's SDGs goals incentivization for that is not linked anywhere. So that is completely broken. And unless we kind of improve that, work on that particular area and bring about a behavioral change, I don't think there'll be a big change at a larger at a scale that we can see.
From industry, if I can, and our company particularly, right? Do we hire for skills on green? No, we don't. Absolutely right. And if I were to extrapolate that to other industries or companies, I would second guess that they probably don't either, depending on scale. And one of the key reasons for that is, and I'm not justifying it, it's a business reason, that when companies, particularly those like ours that are for profit, right, our goals are aligned to what is going to be the end of year profitability. Now, the sustainability goals that have been set out are going to be a cost to the company. There's no doubt about that. And how we think about it, and I'm not justifying it again, is that what's the cost benefit on the bottom line? Now, if it is a cost, then probably the thinking is going to be, how do I reduce that cost, right? And again, it's not the right way to do it, but it is a reality of life. If I was to flip that and start with policy, we do have CSR, for example, and we are mandated to spend a certain amount of our profitability on CSR projects. The counter to that is that for us, for example, we're not allowed to use product that we are in for the CSR project, right? And I don't think that's necessarily the correct way to go, because if we are allowed to do that, then what's going to happen is it's going to incentivize companies to extend the business they're in to look at SDG goals. So for example, and I'll start with us again, is if we're allowed to utilize our books as CSR, because we do carry a lot of stock, right? Inventory is high, to extend it for education. I think that's one way of reaching out to either educational institutes or in India, tier 3 cities. That's practically one way I can look at it. Do we need to look at hiring for green? I absolutely think we should. I do think we need to be mindful of this, and that's the starting point, right? I think if all industries, companies, even set aside 2%, I'm not saying we need to set aside 10, 20, 30, 40, 2 to 5%, and say, you know what, in the next 12 months, this is what we want to achieve. Incremental small steps. Our next hiring, let's get to the universities and hire one person who's got the skill sets. I don't know if universities are training for green or not, to be honest with you. I have absolutely no idea. I hope they are. If they're not, I think they should, because ultimately it will come down to the students who are going to be coming into, because you guys are the new age, right? We guys are the twilight age. We're going to try and do it, but you guys can do it. So I do think, I agree that that combination is very important.
I'm going to ask the academics to come back on that on a second, but there is one aspect I do think that provides some hope here. If we can't do much about the demand side, because profit, can we do something about the supply side? So this is a question to the students in the audience. So those of a more advanced age, don't pretend, no one's going to believe you. But the students in the audience, would you, if you had two job choices, but were roughly the same, so roughly the same salary, roughly the same skills required, would you prefer to work for a company which is more committed to sustainability or one that was more committed to profit? If you would go for the sustainability-minded company, raise your hand. If you would just go straight after profit, now there's a warning for the industrialists, because if your best candidates are going to choose jobs based on what you're doing in sustainability, and you want to employ the best candidates at the lowest cost, you need to think about that. But now, back to the academics, which...
Sorry, I'd love for you guys to ask this question.
Well, you
3 years down the line.
Oh, 3. I did say assuming they were paying the same.
I think you also asked the wrong question because it's also going to be like to like. You said like to like jobs. So you have to ask more salary versus sustainability. Anyway, I'm going to cheer up the students over here. And I think the dialogue is probably more implicit and not explicit. So I'll just give you my background. I've been on both sides of the coin. I'm now an academician, but prior to this, I used to be with McKinsey. I did campus hiring for 3 years. I was in charge of India hiring. I was a partner there. And I then moved to another firm called Oliver Wyman. I was heading India and Asia. So we were colleagues at that point of time, probably. Mercer is a fellow company. So while explicitly no one is hiring for green skills, if you are socially aware and you have strong involvement with the community, for example, I can guarantee you'll have an edge over students who don't. At least in the top tier firms, we look at it very explicitly. So in my interview, I might not ask you what are your green skills, but I'll definitely get into a discussion around how socially aware you are. So that's the good news for you. So please, please, please understand that when Gaurav is going to be interviewing you, he will somewhat in the dialogue like to get people who are socially aware because he loves to be part of that, right? HR might not, so we won't talk about HR over here. So that's, I think, the first thing, that please get involved in projects which involve SDGs. It's going to take your career to the next level. Also, I can also tell you that as you build your career in a company, your CEO at least will love you if you are socially aware. If you go to Gaurav or you go to Mercer and tell them that, look, I want to work on that project, they will love you if you proactively go out and do that. So it's the right thing to do. I think as students, I'm sure Jindal Global is a very socially aware, SDG aware university. But if you're from a university that's not focusing too much on SDGs, go out and demand that from the management. I'm sure they will create projects for you. So many of us are in different phases of evolution as academic universities and institutions. Some are on the higher side of the curve, but somewhere I think as there are some academicians sitting over here and there's some students sitting over here. So demand your involvement in SDGs, because as academicians it's going to push your career up, and as students it's going to take your career ahead. And I can tell you that many of us in India are very socially aware. We are in education. I'm in education because I want to contribute to the community. It's not for money. And there will be lots and lots of people like me out there. Thank you.
And I can confirm that Topi Jindal is very socially aware. And, in fact, I also agree that it's not a so black and white choice. There are a lot of green industries that can make a lot of profit. So you can kind of circle the circle and make both profit and be environmental. We know the history of corporate social responsibility, CSR, many industries following that road actually found out over 10 or 20 years that that's a road to profit. It's not only a road to social responsibility. And I think more and more that will come over time. If you think between fossil fuels and renewable energies, again, 20 years ago, renewable energies were considered to be very expensive and slow. Today we see a very different picture. So we will be there. So basically for the young people here, definitely go for the green education and the green jobs will definitely come. But I see another problem, and it is why it is so slow between understanding, the science understand the problem, but why policymakers and decision makers, both in government and in corporations, come to that very slowly. And my explanation of that is the short-termism versus the long-termism. Again, companies need to report profit every quarter to their shareholders. Governments need to be re-elected after 4 years. And their agenda is always to be re-elected or to report profit. And this is not what the long-term green agenda is about. When we talk about 2030, 2050, zero carbon, we have a long agenda, and it takes the courage of both the private and the public sector to forget or to diminish a little bit your short-termism and to look far ahead, because it will not happen if we don't start today. It's actually not long-term. We need to start today as to achieve what we want to achieve on all SDGs.
Just to reinforce that, remember the saying, the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago. The second best time is today. So, action needs to be taken. But I do like what you mentioned there about the need for leadership, because that is a real challenge, I think, across all sectors. How do we educate the next generation of leaders? Let's just assume that this generation of leaders, the present company accepted, is just gone. What can we do to better educate the next generation of leaders in a way that will stick? Because if you think to MBAs for years have taught about ethical business leadership. That's been a core part of their curriculum for 20 years, 30 years? Do either of you gentlemen have an MBA, by the way? You do? Yeah. 3 MBAs, wow, we are in hallowed elite company here. So you were all taught about ethical leadership, okay? But again, accepting the gentlemen and ladies on the panel here, when we look at the world of business, ethical leadership isn't something that immediately springs to mind very much. We look at Elon Musk. Do we think of ethics as the number one thing that drives him, or even the number 253 thing that drives him? Probably not. So how do we build up education that effectively does that, but does it in a way that will make sense in a business context? Because there's no point in teaching Plato's ethics if it can't be implemented. So that's a tough kind of question to ask. So I'm going to look for a volunteer. It can be either from industry or academia. You're going to jump back in, aren't you?
Well, I think it will not. No, I'm PhD.
I'll pick it up.
You'll pick it up.
It will not happen by teaching leadership. We don't need a course on leadership. We don't need a course on SDGs. I think leadership and SDGs should be integrated in every course we teach. I'll put it this way: any program, any course, need to have that component of leadership, and it need to have that component of sustainability. That's how I see it. We had often debates in academia, what courses should we offer as to create future leadership, but there is no single answer. There is no silver bullet. We need to integrate other skills, and you mentioned, Duncan, several of those: ethics, responsibility, social awareness. The way to listen, even, is a very important leadership skill. So leadership skills are there, and they are ingrained, they are inserted in everything we teach. So that's how I will answer them.
So I'm going to pick this up, and I have, again, some very strong views about this, Duncan. I think this whole concept of skilling in India and probably in the world has just gone too far ahead. So let's step back. What is the role of a university? And I think the role of a university is to create leaders out of all of you, create problem solvers out of you, not to create people who know how to use a screwdriver. And we, I think, are in the profession of inspiration. So if you can inspire you to do new things, just to add to what you're saying. So what can we do? So it's the signaling theory, which basically means that everything that we do in the university needs to help you become a leader. For example, if you want to go out and plant a tree, then just don't plant it yourself, but make sure that 30 people also plant it, and we celebrate your success. It's not a course, but it's something which is ingrained in the culture that you do. If you think about being aware about water, or aware about electricity or clean energy, etc., it's part of the way you live inside the community, which is, in this case, the university. Because we care for you, we inspire you to make sure that you live those SDGs on a daily basis. So I think that's the role that universities need to play. It's a very difficult one. It's not an easy one for us because we all keep talking about placements. Again, I would mention this to my fellow academicians. If you provide great education in the form of inspiration, placements will happen. It's a consequence of great education. Don't worry too much about placements, because we are in the profession of building a university that's going to take 20 years to be great. We're not over here creating a teaching shop, so that'll be what the thought. So I've been in multiple boards of my clients as a consultant, and I'm talking about global boards over here. I can assure you that I still sit on the board of a couple of firms, large companies in India. SDGs are very important to leadership. Every board that I know talks about SDGs today. We talk about social awareness. So if you are, again, as a young professional entering a company, entering an academic institution, and you take initiative to go out and say, I want to do something, I can almost guarantee a quality university, a quality company will give you a pat on the back. And if they don't, leave the company, move to somewhere else, because that's the future of the world.
Can I address this from a corporate perspective? Sorry, you go ahead. So, the reality is that I do agree about the groundswell, right? But I do think the guy who leads or the girl who leads a company, as you rightly said, they've got to be very clear to say, you know what, yes, this is going to impact us a certain percentage, but we have to do it. I'll give you a real working example at Penguin Random House. What did we do about 2 to 3 years back? We said every book of ours that comes out is going to be FSC paper. And while what that primarily means is we don't go out and plant trees, but we've teamed up such that for all the paper we buy, there are trees planted. But that has, well, in our case, it came top down. But, you know, I said this is something we have to do. Now what we're doing is we're looking at paper which is going to be completely bleach-free. And that's really important. So in our own way, we are contributing. And exactly to your point, I do think industry is very aware across the board, right, of what needs to be done. I do think these have to be incremental steps. But I do think that everything we do at an industry level has to be a call to action. I don't have the patience for a lot of skilling, as you know, to your point, because I do think that that can go on for time immemorial. It's a very simple thing. No matter in which industry we're in, if we just go in with the mindset, what are we producing? Is that impacting the environment? Can we think about creative ways of not impacting the environment? I mean, that's pretty much what we're trying to solve for, right? What do we want to solve for, and how do we want to win? And that's pretty much a McKinsey, slogan. But it's so true. And I do think corporate, to your point, is very aware. My earlier points notwithstanding.
Just to add to what Atul said, university's role on creating problem solvers and leaders, and I just want to give an example where we're still a smaller company, we're not that big, but as we grow, there are a lot of requirement of, colleagues who could take up leadership role, people who can step up, beyond their age and, take up roles which can help us grow. Some of the universities have become a very happy hunting ground for us. Year on year, we've got people from there who've kind of stepped up and taken up those opportunities, and we're seeing the results now. And this is where, what you mentioned, right? As a university, if you build a culture of problem-solving leadership rather than that load, giving those skills specific, I think that helps. And, our relationship with the university, engagement that we do with the university, kind of goes up a couple of notches higher.
So I thought that as the only person who doesn't have a doctorate degree nor an MBA, is a woman, the only one on this panel, I have, I must speak in that sense. So I want to say that universities provide us with opportunities for leadership in a low-stake environment. Mistakes you make in your universities are the best learning grounds that you have. And you will have to find that, So that is the first step in leadership, finding what you want to lead, each individual one of you. And if you find where your passion lies, and you can then find the opportunity to lead while you're still in this environment to experiment, you will be honing that skill, you'll have a story to tell, and I think you'll find a direction in life. So it's critically important for universities to give it, but as important for you to find that within your organizations, because ultimately leadership is about breaking new grounds in a way, and you might have to break a new ground wherever you are in that sense. So universities today allow much more flexibility than in my time, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but it's true that a lot of the universities present in this room do allow that provision, and you have the chance to negotiate with your leadership around you, and you'll find that that's a transferable skill. Now, to answer the other part as to without a degree, how did I get where I got, the answer is that you have to develop transferable skills. So one of the things is there are some common elements in terms of finding innovation, in joining the dots, and these are the things as anybody would develop, and the university will provide you opportunities, but you must find them for yourselves as well. And I think that the fact that you're in this room, you're extremely privileged, and with privilege comes some responsibilities, and I hope that you'll all become great leaders as you go along.
Thank you. And it just occurred to me whilst we were having that discussion that there is an important group of people who aren't, well, there are many important groups of people who aren't represented on the panel. We've only got a small number of us. But one of the groups that isn't represented on this panel, but is really critical in terms of collaboration between both industry and university, are of course politicians. Because in many cases, they are setting the frameworks in which both industry and universities work. For example, they set up the laws around financial reporting. And if they change those laws to say, actually, you need to think in 5 or 10 years terms, that would have a severe sounds negative, that would have a huge impact on the way that CEOs and COOs operate, because you are driven by the laws that govern you. Universities similarly driven by the laws. So what can we do from both within the higher education sector, but also critically from industry, to actually educate political leaders so that they can be more effective in supporting us to drive forward the SDGs? Who would like to?
Let me start with this. It's a difficult one, and I guess this is the time we should...
Sorry, I should say I was a politician at one point, but I didn't think short term enough, so I am now no longer a politician.
And one thing we can do, Duncan, is to elect the right politicians. And this is the role of every citizen. And we need to ask the right questions when we elect the politicians. Unfortunately, we don't. I see in many countries in Europe, for example, people don't ask the right questions. They don't ask the politicians what they will do with environment, with climate change, with renewable energies, with electric mobility, with waste management in cities. It's very political. It's very divisively political. And that's why I think the missing agenda when we elect politicians is those sustainable development goals and climate change. And how to change that? Again, we have an excellent book by Christiana Figueres, What to Do, and one of the lessons she says is to write the right questions, to make politicians accountable for what we do. And in democratic countries, and India is the biggest democracy in the world, that's the way to do that, to ask the right questions to politicians who aspire for power.
So I think two things over here from a university / student / academician perspective. So let's step back, and again we're talking about the role of universities. So our role is to challenge policy, influence policy. But how many of us are writing about policy, whether as students or not? So immediately after this meeting, meet Gaurav, write a book on what future of India should look like. But I think jokes apart, it's not just about us elites who will make the change. We need to make the belly of India change. And once that belly understands, when I meet the belly, I'm talking about the middle class, the lesser privileged, and below that. Politicians, in my opinion, are very, very smart. They are the smartest people around, Duncan. Once they understand the need of the pulse of the population, they can change gears very, very quickly. I think the bureaucrats are the ones which are the more difficult ones to handle. The politicians are the less ones to handle. But if we consistently write about policy, we consistently write about our views, and we can influence our fellow citizens, I think we'll be in a better way to influence the politicians.
No, I agree. I think if we start influencing, there are changes that we can see, and that has happened in past as well. But also you need to engage with right stakeholders in the government. One is going through, spreading that, sharing those thoughts, ideas, our policy, but also engaging with right sort of stakeholders inside the government. It's also important because while the politicians might feel the pulse and would want to make certain decisions, and agree with Atul, it's the next layer, the bureaucracy, which kind of stalls or delays a lot of things. So you've got to have engagements there as well, especially in these sectors which have a social impact, environment impact. Larger engagement is required. But I keep coming back to my previous point of incentivization. I think that's a bigger problem that we need to solve if this change has to happen at scale, because that piece is still missing right now. And I agree with Gaurav when he said that, when we look at hiring from a particular perspective, it's a cost for us. And the first reaction is, how do I reduce my cost? Again, if there is some incentivization built around it for corporate when they're hiring, for students when they're in the institution learning, vis-a-vis my core subjects, if I'm spending some time here, it's an opportunity cost to me. But will this lead to something? Yes. Some organization, yes. But again, how do you do it at scale? There has to be some incentivization linked to it. That's a core area I think we need to solve, and I'm sure it'll, there are, examples we talked about, where, there are some islands of excellence where we are solving for it, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Hello. Okay, yeah. So what I was going to say was, from the British Council perspective, we have found that the way in which research is communicated is often so dense that people can't make out the full scope and impact of it. And we have a program for early career researchers on communicating their research finding for influencing policy. Because sometimes when you're saying something and the other person isn't hearing it, maybe we need to reflect how we're putting across our thoughts as well in that sense. And we hope that will kind of, sort of solve a little bit of the problem in that sense.
Excellent. Now I am about to open this for questions from the floor. So please, you've got a few seconds to think. Oh, you've already thought. Excellent. Well, we'll come in a second. But just before I did that, I did say the one thing that I think would have the biggest single impact on politicians would be if more young people voted. It's a problem that we see throughout the world, is that the people who vote are people in my age group, and the people who vote less are people in the young age group. In your age group, yes, obviously. And that's a real problem, because that imbalances, because politicians follow voters. They have to, otherwise they, like me, they stop being politicians. Involuntary, I might add. So I would say, if we can get more young people to vote, people who have a vested interest, not just in the next 5 years, but in the 10, 20, 30 years, then that will have a big influence.